I think we are going. Um, welcome everyone. Um, the first of a handful of introductions. Um, we have guests here who don't know anything about our lecture series, so I'm going to kind of contextualize it first there. Um, this lecture series is hosted by MA Graphic Communication Design, and we had usually around 10 lectures per year. And for the last few years, we've been gathering these lectures under the heading of practice is critical. So the idea is that we're looking at a range of different types of practices, how they are practiced, and the kind of urgent, critical, and analytical questions that arise through the way that we think about practicing as graphic designers, communication designers, researchers, teachers, and a whole range of activities that relate to what we do here on this course. We are doing a bit of experimenting with the series from this point on in the year. I've mentioned before that when we come back in summer term, we're going to have a series that's co-hosted with Library Stack. And I can tell you right now that we are expecting to have Nat Piper, who does a lot of work around queer identities and typography. We'll be joined by Chris Lee, and also a London-based group called Interpret that does kind of design-led investigation work around the climate crisis. So we've also now been trying to create a better relationship with some of our local friends, such as News and Coffee. So tonight, this specific lecture is kind of co-organized and co-hosted with News and Coffee, specifically with James Lafar and the support of Pauline Val, who's also here. And I'm going to turn it over now to James to introduce our guest for tonight.
Oh, yeah, that's it, me.
Sorry. Before I do that, we do have prizes. Yeah. So we have 2 bundles of publications that we're giving. These are mega prizes. So 2 lucky winners will walk away with a stack of 4 publications. So the rules of the game are, if you haven't joined us before, put your name on a post-it. We can take the whole bowl. Yeah. Put your name on a post-it, fold up the post-it, put it in the bowl, pass the bowl along, and we'll draw some names.
Shame we couldn't be outside, sat in the cold rain. Next time. So this is News and Coffee. Well, this is News and Coffee in Grantham Square. I'll give a quick introduction to News and Coffee just so you get a bit of context. So News and Coffee started in Barcelona 5 years ago, and the concept is selling specialty coffee in independent magazines. When it opened straight away, it almost changed the Spanish market for independent magazines. It really sort of introduced them to, by the concept of the kiosk being in the street, it creates the opportunity for people to discover independent magazines, which you'd never find unless you went to a specialist bookshop or a gallery store, or you were actually looking for those publications. So you really did change the market there. I run a company called Ferrari Ollie, which is a distribution company for independent magazines, supplying News and Coffee in Spain, and saw the opportunity in London, saw the kiosk disappearing, and we got going with one in Holborn 2 years ago now. It wasn't that straightforward to get going, but it had an amazing reaction in London, and from there, luckily, we were contacted by the guys at Grantham Square and had this kiosk here, which is designed by a Hebrick studio. And it had never been used for selling print products. It was designed as a magazine paper kiosk, and it's been used for all sorts of things. And luckily, we got to open it in October, and it's been perfect. Grantham Square and King's Cross is perfect for this kind of thing, compared to Holborn, where actually the footfall is higher. It's people are just on their way. There's no one has time to stop and browse through a magazine. But here it's perfect. So if you haven't been yet, pop over and have a look, grab a coffee. So tonight we've got Nina from It's Freezing LA. I don't know if you know the magazine. She's got a presentation coming up in a sec, so you can discover more about it. And we've got John, who's editor at Courier. Time Out, a few other publications in the past, and he's got working on quite a few projects. We did have Rondo Walk, which is the latest one we did, but we will have those around London, so we can sort those out if you want to see one. It's a free publication. So Nina, you're up first.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry.
Yeah. Okay.
It's funny speaking with a mic, so hopefully you can hear a bit of an echo of your voice, can't you? So hopefully I shout, not really post. Yeah, thank you for having me. Thanks for introducing so beautifully. I'm Nina Carter, as you can see there on the bag, and I'm an illustrator. I'm an educator. I work at Kingston School of Art, and I'm also co-founder of a project called It's Reading in LA, which you can see here. It's a project that I founded whilst I was studying illustration animation at Kingston School of Art. I was a creative director for about 7 years. Recently stepped back, and I'm still part of the family of kind of the magazine, but no longer kind of directing it. But I'm going to talk a bit about kind of criticality in relation to sustainability and also publishing. I guess some of the questions that we've asked and some of the conversations that we've had in the production of the magazine. But just to give you a bit of a rundown of what we are. We're a non-profit mag about the climate crisis and the ecological crisis, and there's a few covers up here. We have two things a year, two publications a year. One is a kind of normal issue, which comes out in November, and one is a kind of special edition that comes out in May. And you can see the special editions. They've got a slightly different cover, and they cover slightly different topics. So they're around things like there's a poetry collection to stand on shifting ground, or a collection of creative responses to the climate crisis, which is the pink and green cover in the bottom left. But all the other kind of normal issues are relating to sort of specific themes within the climate crisis. So it might be something like borders, migration, regeneration, within the kind of through the lens of the climate crisis. And our name has kind of never felt more relevant. It comes from this tweet that Donald Trump shared in 2013. And we started publishing in 2018. So 2 years after he came into office for the first time. And yeah, he tweeted that I stole rolls from Texas to Tennessee. I'm in Los Angeles and it's freezing. Global warming is a total and very expensive hoax. Which is obviously quite a big misunderstanding between weather and science. So we that's where our namesake came from. And thank God for people like Rosa Morton who like are out there on Twitter, kind of like replying to Trump. But our name, I guess, was kind of founded on criticality. This idea that we wanted to kind of poke and prod at something that we disagreed with and something we felt was wrong, and I guess so clearly kind of publicly and politically right. So we named ourselves It's Reading in LA. And when we were starting in the kind of climate communication space, we really felt that there was this kind of quite disparate way of talking about climate. There was this activism kind of language, and there was a scientific language. And to us, they felt like the activism kind of could be quite hot-headed and felt kind of like people were pushed away. Some people were pushed away, and the science was often also distancing and kind of confusing. And so we wanted to find something that we found a middle ground. So with the exclamation mark in the middle, which definitely still feels quite activist, but we're the project hopefully that kind of found that. We need to make the subject more accessible to kind of more people. So we wanted to find a magazine that was kind of really accessible and informative and allow people to find a way into the subject. And so to do that, we really wanted to kind of invite everyone kind of in between activism and science, everyone on that spectrum, to hopefully make the subject a bit more kind of accessible and clear. Hopefully this plays. Yeah, so these are kind of some of the varying spreads covered throughout our issues. We've had 11 issues and 2 special editions now. But really, it's kind of just to show that there's this huge mosaic of kind of content that we bring into the magazine. So there's obviously writing from a writer, there's edits from an editor, there's infographics from a data visualizer, there's kind of illustrations from an illustrator, and they all kind of sit alongside each other in this kind of quite quite puzzle, I guess, all kind of informing and enriching, I guess, hopefully each other. And the idea is that all of these different voices are really kind of probing and questioning from different perspectives and really kind of introducing different insights. And the idea is not just to value the scientists above anyone else, but value kind of everyone who has experienced or has experience of climate. But for us, it's also kind of, the edges of the paper aren't really the edges of like collaboration. So we have many writers, many editors throughout the magazine, but we've also got all of the kind of footnotes, all the people that have come before, all the researchers, all of the conversations that have been had to inform the work that's on the pages. So I guess for us, we felt that to write particularly about climate, you had to kind of embrace this like incredibly complex and kind of interwoven subject that relates to everything in our lives. And so we wanted to kind of go beyond the kind of oil and gas. So we've written about everything from like witchcraft, theatre, food legislation, and and oil and gas. But we've tried to kind of really cover a range of different topics and invite experts from different fields to kind of put their input. And obviously in doing that, we have experts from so many different places. We come from so many different fields as a group. So I'm from an illustration background, but the editors from an energy background. We're really, as a team, quite a multidisciplinary team. And in doing so, we ask each other very, very different questions. So I'm quite a climate rookie, to be honest. I care, but I'm not trained within a climate space. And so for me, I ask questions of something when it doesn't make sense. I read through the pieces and I say that doesn't communicate very clearly. And similarly, the editor does the same for me when the design or the creative direction feels like it's not working. They would say this doesn't work, rather than being surrounded by a kind of bubble of people from the same field. We found it really useful to kind of have those different voices, and I guess to kind of keep each other quite critical. We're hopefully improving accessibility. The more people you've got on board, the more people who have a kind of stake in something, I guess, the more that they care and want to kind of want to get the most out of it. So for us, it felt really useful to have those different. I guess for moving a little bit into the kind of design of the publication, which is kind of where my background is in the creative direction. I wanted to share some of the kind of questions and considerations that we've had to come to throughout the years and throughout our journey. And I might get in trouble with our designer for showing you these, because I think the one on the left was one of our first iterations of the first cover, which he'll never show to anyone. He won't even show people the actual first issue cover. So this one's definitely not going to go anywhere. But I think it's quite. I think it's important because for us, we've always tried to embrace change, and like if there's an appetite for change in our group, we've really embraced it, because I think if you're doing a non-profit independent magazine, like you don't have the people there to say to you, you have to stick to this particular structure, this particular rhythm. It is useful to have some structures and routines for any kind of publication that's got people that buy you and people that work with you. But we've really tried to kind of embrace this flavor of change, because if you're going to try and make a project that's sustainable and kind of interesting to you as a practice, as a practitioner, then we didn't want it to feel stagnant, and we didn't want it to feel like it kind of was only applicable to like a single moment in time. So for us, we really wanted to kind of consistently change and ask kind of what should we go here all the time. So we're always asking questions. Myself and the designer Matthew Lewis, who's the co-creative director, we can be quite feisty with each other when we're getting an issue started, and kind of really asking each other like why this reference, why this thing, why that thing, why these colours, and I think that kind of healthy debate, I guess, is useful. This was maybe just something to kind of point where we first kind of started with this idea of quite bold typography on the cover, which you can see there's some at the front that hopefully you can have a look at later. We were really interested in looking at how protest and kind of activist design and typography has existed, and this is fashion designer Catherine Hamner meeting Margaret Thatcher, and I guess understanding that it's a moment that's going to be documented. How can she use this as a space to kind of say something? And so for us, we were really interested in how we could use typography and use language that is sitting in someone's home. Having Donald Trump's tweets sit on your kind of in your toilet, on your kitchen table, for us felt like a really important use of use of paper, use of publication. So yeah, we were really interested in how we can kind of use these statements, and there's our bold typography that's kind of like being fitting into. But we were also interested in this idea of kind of a magazine cover, almost like a placard, rather than it being classically magazines kind of have masthead text at the top of the page. And for us, we were really interested in how you can kind of think of it more as a kind of statement and a poster, placard. So we worked with that from issue 2 as a kind of bold statement. This image is by this great group. I actually don't know if they exist anymore, but Louvre, who are a shop in LA, and they, with almost every publication, every like object that they sell, they kind of creative direction the entire scene. So we've been really lucky to have quite a few of them. So the first image under ice was also them. Here's another way that we kind of trying to like place this information, I guess, in people's homes. We have a data graphic that runs throughout each issue. You can see 4 different issues here. But I guess for us, the questions we're asking is like, what happens when we start to place this kind of information in people's homes? What happens when you've got kind of like a data set of hurricane, which you can see in the top left, sat, when you're having breakfast? So what's that connection then to that data? And what does it mean to kind of make quite complex information kind of beautiful and interesting, and place it in people's homes? But a question that we've kind of always asked, which I guess is a kind of, we're never going to answer, but what does it mean to kind of make very I guess beautiful or interesting or appealing images of something so disruptive? So we're working with a subject that's kind of so destroys and can kind of have really personal stories about destruction for people. And so what does it mean when we're making these images that are kind of visualizing that in ways that appeal? How can that kind of, I guess, bring the abstract into your home? And then we also, moving a bit more into my area, my background in illustration, we also really interested in what images we can use to communicate climate. So how kind of images can communicate these like incredibly existential questions that we're asking and challenges that we're kind of facing. And can they, should they? When we first started, we really saw that there was this kind of repetition in like symbols, icons, sometimes photographs of kind of quite epic ecological destruction. We felt like there was a real kind of distance between the human in them. There was like we often felt maybe a bit like a spectator of the crisis rather than a participant in it. So there was this kind of overhead look at like polar bears, ice caps, which were really moving. But I think there's something about having a human perspective that we felt would be really important. And so for us, we didn't want to publish images that felt like we were kind of watching something change, but maybe that we were kind of in it. And so we found illustration. I'm also biased, obviously, because I come from an illustration background, but felt illustration would be a really lovely way to, I guess, pass those images through someone and allow them to kind of to communicate with the reader. And they also offer a really lovely sense of kind of, there's always a very soft edge, of kind of like a non-perfect depiction of something. So there's room to interpret, room to you can read into an image, can't you? Someone might see loss, someone might see hope in an image, in an illustrative image. I often come back to this Earthrise image from 1968 by Bill Anders. It was kind of like the first time we saw like the whole, the marble of the earth in whole, almost whole. And it really shifted the kind of ecological movement, because suddenly we kind of saw this thing, and it was like seeing is believing. We could understand what we were working with rather than something that was kind of really abstract. And I think the same goes for climate. We kind of see it through someone's eyes. I think it feels more moving. It's kind of moves beyond like the hard stuff, the like data infographics, and it moves into kind of soft stuff, whatever that means, like into the kind of more emotional, tangible stuff. So we kind of really looked at illustrative work that does that. I think you saw this one, this slide, but this is a lovely image by Mary Herbert, which was in issue 4, and it was for a piece by Diego Arguides Ortiz, and he was kind of writing about how in his hometown in Costa Rica, he could see climate change because he was seeing kind of like fireflies disappear, he was seeing the misty kind of cloud forests disappear. And so for him, that felt quite easy to understand and see. But for many people, illustration climate, isn't very visible. It's kind of this thing that's happening somewhere else. And so we found that, again, illustration was a really interesting way to kind of make that invisible visible and make it kind of really tangible to people in front of them. So kind of zooming out a bit from those like little details, I'll try and just whiz through this idea of actually the critical questions we've asked when we've actually printed a physical publication. So obviously there are questions around, we always get asked kind of like, why are you printing a magazine about climate? And obviously paper is a really delicate, or uses really delicate resources. And so what does it mean to actually print when you're kind of using those resources? But for us, it felt like print media, print publications and zines, magazines have got such an activist history, kind of passing things around, sharing things, producing things, reproducing things very easily. And for us, we always wanted to make something that was kind of cheap on as indie magazines go, as cheap as it could be. And was kind of distributable, and people could reach it, hold on to it, collect it, share it. And you can print sustainably. And we, using kind of wholly recycled, non-toxic papers that haven't been flown halfway across the world, using soy ink or non-toxic inks, using compostable bags, thinking about the paper size. So when you print on a big sheet, you're reducing the amount of offcuts that you produce. Or using pre-orders to understand how many people actually want to buy them things. So you're not printing, hundreds and hundreds of thousands, and you only need 5. It's worth kind of considering that there are things you can do, steps you can take that mean that printing physically can be sustainable, we felt. And digital carbon footprints are really can be huge. It's just, I think with AI now, some of those things are becoming more visible and understandable to us, but just because the resource is less physical in front of us, it's not paper, it's a kind of resource that we can't see, they have a huge impact. And so for us, we were really keen on actually producing something that could be passed around and kind of, as you can see here, kind of create a bit of a network. So we've been really lucky to kind of reach quite a lot of different places. We're now in 6 continents, not yet Antarctica, but if anyone's going, and do bring the magazine. We think also this idea of kind of like reaching out to contributors who are kind of all over the world. You create tiny little networks with people who you collaborate with, people who you invite to speak and listen, are then have a kind of a part to play, a stake in this work, and you're building a bit of a web and a network. So for us, that's been really valuable. And I guess the more people that are interested in the project, the more of a platform that you have. And for us, that's been really helpful in allowing us to kind of collaborate with different groups to help us print the magazine. So we've always had collaborators for every issue. From issue 1, when we only had 250 copies, was Vegan Markets UK. And in issue 4, we had 12,000 copies. It was Optimus Energy. They've always been something that's helped us print. And it will be to this day. And that sometimes universities, we've worked with CSM, students at CSM, to produce publications, which I don't know if you've got any, but I've got a little poetry book here, which we made with CCC here. So there's always people that we're kind of reaching out to make this happen. And as a non-profit project, that's the kind of things that we have to do. We have to be kind of resourceful. But yeah, when you kind of make an object and people want to engage with it, you have a platform, and so it's really valuable, I think, to think about who you platform in that space. So for us, we've had to think really carefully about who those collaborators are and where they come from. Slightly daunting image really to sort of end on, but I was thinking about some of the critical questions we're asking, and one of them is also really about time. This is the doomsday clock. Sorry. But we always face a bit of a time-based problem, because as a subject that's kind of so it's a time-based issue, it's a time-based theme, in that it's stuff is changing very rapidly, and so for us there's always been a bit of a kind of felt like a bit of a rush to get things out, but equally that can be really difficult to work with as a group of people who are just humans and have other jobs, etc. So we've had to be really careful about valuing time and valuing kind of our energy. And, you know, when you choose to kind of exert yourselves and really produce something, like, do we need to publish 15 things a year, or do we actually just publish 2 things that we feel like are really, really valuable? How can you kind of produce the thing, I guess, in a healthy way that means that you can sustain it and it's not just something you produce once? And the final kind of, like, I guess, critical question is also kind of related to the roles that people have in a project. So these are some of the wonderful people that are involved in the magazine. That's actually in CSM at the bottom right, with CCC, the course that we work with on the poetry book. But there's always a question around kind of like what role do you take in the project? And for us, that's always become quite blurry. I mean, we were just sort of discussing this at the front a little bit, like the idea of you know, in a small project, you do take on multiple roles. You're kind of, if you are interested in being the editor or the designer, you often have to start bleeding into kind of like funding. You bleed into partnerships. You bleed into kind of, I bled into design. It's not really my background. My background's in illustration, but I think it's roles that are flexible have been really interesting for us, because we've been able to kind of revisit this idea of what is an art editor, what is an art director, what is a creative director, what do these roles mean to us, how do we define them? Is everyone doing the same thing? Is everyone, you know, what's the kind of like hierarchy in the group? And I guess for us, it's kind of like, you know, listening more than you're speaking, and making sure that there's moments where we're not just kind of meeting to produce something, but moments that we're meeting to just be people and kind of have ideas and communicate, has been really valuable. But I think that is, I definitely been more than 10 minutes, but thank you.
Hey everyone, my name's John. Can you all hear me okay? Great. So I'm a feature writer and editor, which means I kind of work on a lot of different projects at the same time. Sometimes I could be writing a 5,000 word long form investigation, which takes 20, 30 interviews. Other times I could be working with a very small team of people as editor, where you're kind of, like Nina was just hinting at, like, you kind of oversee how the whole magazine comes together. So you come up with story ideas, you help come up with the photographers, the illustrators you want to commission, and then kind of package it all together. But it's worth me mentioning I'm not a designer or illustrator, so my presentation is extremely lo-fi, so don't expect any fireworks, please. Okay, so first of all, I've kind of my career so far has pretty much been evenly split between working for kind of legacy, traditional global media companies, and over the past 4 or 5 years, more independent, smaller, scrappier startup, some of them tiny bit more radical publications. So I just wanted to go through kind of like what I've done and in what order I've done it, not because I want to bore you with my career, just because how we engage more critically with subjects comes up. There's quite a big split between traditional media and kind of like independent publications, and what you can and can't do, and what kind of stories get told. So I thought it'd be useful just to go through what I've been up to. So after I finished my master's in journalism, I went straight to Shanghai for 2 years. I went there to launch Time Out magazine. We were a really tiny team of 5 editors. Some of the most talented people I've actually ever worked with. We did a lot of the whole, like, you know, here are the 10 best ice cream shops in Shanghai, here are the best theme parks, which was fun. But we also did a lot of kind of local reporting about kind of the problem with how China carries out its census or women in the workplace. So it was kind of like more Time Out back in the 80s, that kind of spirit. But why I'm kind of mentioning this as well is I didn't get kicked out of China, that's an exaggeration, but my visa didn't get renewed because while I was there, I started reporting for UK publications about one such stories about Ai Weiwei, So he was kind of like really becoming a massive artist on the international stage. This was back in like 2011, 2012. And he was under house arrest. He accused the police of beating him up. He had his head shaved to have surgery and had a big scar. He was like publicizing these images, and he was placed under house arrest. And the Chinese government ordered the demolition of his Beijing studio. So I actually went along to this event. He had a massive feast. He wasn't there himself, but he provided everyone with river crabs and other Chinese delicacies, and we had a great day. I wrote about that story for the New Statesman back in England. Didn't think anything of it. A couple of months later, I wrote a big profile of him for Huck magazine. And a few other kind of stories similar in spirit. And then when I went to renew my visa for the first time, they said no, and it was basically because I'd written these articles. And I'm only mentioning this because, you know, the topic of today, how do we engage more critically with culture? We are, lucky might be the wrong word. Back then, it was very unlucky in China that you weren't able to. So we are in a really privileged position where there are so many amazing independent magazines and brilliant stories being told. So we're quite lucky we even get to engage with a lot of the issues we want to. So when I came, this is the worst picture in the slideshow, by the way. So when I came back to London, I started working at FT Weekend on the Life and Arts section, which is the weekly culture section, which I was looking after like long form essays. There's a slot called Lunch with the FT, which could be it's like the most prestigious interview slot in the FT. It's like 3,000 words. You have lunch with someone, the FT pays the bill. That's the only rule. And it could be a politician, it could be a scientist, it could be an artist, it could be a chef. So I spent about 6 or 7 years at the FT, writing stories for Life and Arts in the magazine. I never did any hard news. And it's interesting to think back on those times now. The scale of coverage is vast. Like, you know, every day there are something like 300-400 stories being published. So, you know, you would, initially you might think, okay, just pick a subject, politics, they're going to cover absolutely everything. With 100 articles a day about politics, you're going to tick every box. Similarly with art, film, whatever you want it to be. But you quickly come to understand that while the coverage is amazing, you have to be very specific with what you kind of cover. You have to cover particular art shows, you have to cover particular artists, so on and so forth. So even though it's incredible to have a huge audience, you know, some articles can get 500,000 views, for example. Like, there are different pressures that come with that. So the types of stories you want to tell, whether through your design work, your illustration, or your writing, really think hard about which format kind of suits the kind of stories you want to tell best. So I left the FT to become editor of a magazine called Courier. It was kind of a startup. It had been going for about 2 or 3 years when I joined. A team of like 10 people. It was kind of a modern business publication that tried to reflect how people like actually live and work today. So people with like 4 jobs at the same time, somebody who had a really crappy 9-to-5 job they hated and had a magazine on the side. So we covered like business from a completely different perspective to the Financial Times, which was quite refreshing to jump into that world. And what's quite interesting was lots of the stories for example, this is Urchin and Chang. She's one half of Bao, which are a restaurant group across London. They have one just in King's Cross, actually. And this is a good example of how the FT had a really beautiful, incredible piece of them where Urchin cooked them like a meal, and they just did like a really beautiful photo shoot, and it looked absolutely stunning. Whereas we wrote like a much longer piece, less about the food and more about how her and her husband are kind of trained as artists first and then decided to open a restaurant. So it's kind of like the idea of being artist first, chef second. So it's just interesting. I worked on both of those stories, one at the FT and one for Courier. It's just interesting, like I was saying, depending on what format you're picking, the way you approach a story is entirely different. We traveled back to Taiwan with Urchin, back to her home. took loads of like original photography there, which no one else had at that time. So independent magazines give you a real opportunity to kind of think slightly more outside the box. And as also Nina touched on, we are living in a time when everything is becoming so polarized. Facts are very hard to distinguish between real facts and fake news. So like it's a really, but having said all that, it's a really like important time for publishing, and we are in like a kind of golden age of independent magazines. The problem is making money from them, which we might come on to in the Q&A at some point. But aside from that, I think there's never been a better time to enter publishing, whatever topic you're personally interested in. So this was just a story about teeth germs. This was a story about a kind of like new way of talking about men's fashion, which is kind of like completely opened up in the last 2-3 years, especially. These guys are called Throwing Fits. They're based in New York. They have a podcast and a really interesting publishing model where they make about, I think they're up to like $40,000 a month just between the two of them, just the podcast or YouTube channels. And that's basically it. This was a big feature we did about the rise of all the female hiking groups in LA. And this guy is based in Accra. He calls his practice Slum Studio. So again, it's just the sense of kind of trying to get to places which kind of traditional media might not always go, and trying to think what, like, how you want to tell a story best, and not just kind of like adding to the pile of stuff already out there a million times. Now, recently I've been working with Real Review. So this is an independent publication. A guy called Jack Self is the editor-in-chief, and Maddie Weavers is the deputy editor. And they have like the day jobs, both of them. They just do this. They release it twice a year, sometimes 3 times a year, sometimes once a year. It's completely ad hoc. And it's a really beautiful publication which kind of engages with contemporary culture. It's called What It Means to Live Today is their tagline. And I've included this project just as an example again of how publishing can often be, you can often be very critical and radical in quite a low-key way, and that's actually a much easier way sometimes to engage a bigger readership. So Real Review do some really kind of like experimental writing. They write about climate, waste, racism. They write about all these big topics, but they kind of draw you in a really kind of like friendly and low-key ways. They don't feel like they're hitting you over the head with like really hardcore topics. The issue 15, they decided to run no imagery in the whole issue because of the Israel-Palestine conflict, which you can see here. So again, it's just like the ways you can be critical can be quite subtle at the same time with your like writing and design language. I recently wrote an essay for them. It comes out in the next issue about running culture and like the rise of run clubs. On the face of it, obviously, that's nothing terrible. It's cool, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, it was trying to kind of like investigate this idea of like everything we do now is becoming monetized. Even something as simple as a run is becoming, you have to be part of a cool club. You have to end with a coffee and a pastry, even though you've only run 3 or 4K. So it's trying to engage with contemporary issues in a kind of quietly critical way. And I think lots of publications do this now, independent publications in particular, even like it's reading in LA. So they're very serious topics and subject matter, but you don't feel, again, like you don't feel like the weight of the world crashing in upon your head from reading these publications. They make them fun at the same time. There's a really amazing magazine called Cake Zoom. So yeah, on the face of it, it's about baking and cakes. And there are some recipes in there, but often in one issue, I remember they had a story about this girl, it was her first ever job, and she had to make cookies for a Goldman Sachs corporate party, and just like the hellish experience she had. So they engage with lots of really important topics through baking, and they're quietly radical through the topic of baking, which I think is pretty incredible. Similarly, sometimes I write for a publication called the Whitney Review of New Writing. They launched probably 2 years ago now, and so they're trying to, you know, most of the time you think literary criticism, for example, you might think of like 5,000 word essays or the London Review of Books, things which might be quite alienating to some people. So nearly all of their writing is super short form. They run a couple of essays, but they're not that long. There can be reviews of 100 words in there, 300 words. They review a tweet, an Instagram post, advertising campaign on the underground. So their idea of criticism is completely different from what we might have thought of as literary criticism 2 or 3 years ago. But again, they do it in a really fun and engaging way. They don't try and like beat you into submission with their new way of thinking. So again, yeah, this is a publication I really enjoy at the moment. I wrote a piece about book acknowledgements for them. There's like lots of data around at the back of novels, you know, when people say thank you. Back in the day, no one did them at all. They've been getting longer and longer and longer. I think Sheryl Sandberg holds one of the records. Her acknowledgements are like 30 pages. She thanks like 450 people or something insane. And for someone like her, it doesn't matter, but a lot of writers actually do that because the book publishing industry is quite a difficult position, and a lot of first-time writers get really screwed over. They don't make much money. So one theory I had was that they're writing these crazy long acknowledgements because they're kind of so desperate to get that second book. So again, it's like taking kind of a nothing topic, which is kind of not that important on the face of it, and trying to engage with contemporary culture in kind of like ways people might not have thought of before. And they do an amazing job of bringing together like lots of new writers. I really personally love the design, but it's very low key. But it's a really good place to discover new writers and practitioners. This is a brand new magazine called Footnote. It just got published for the first time a couple of months ago. And it's got a really interesting concept. So they have an essay at the front. They got a short story writer to write it, and then everything throughout the rest of the issue picks up on something mentioned in that first essay, which is a piece of fiction. So they asked me to write a piece. There's the word like pollution was mentioned in the opening essay, so I decided to profile a guy called Fergal Sharkey. He used to be in a punk band back in the 80s. He sang his song Teenage Kicks with the Undertones, which became like a global anthem. And then he quit music. Now he's like in his 60s. And he was fishing one day in his local fly fishing spot just outside of London. And he noticed the stream was getting narrower and narrower and narrower. And he was like, what the hell's going on? So he investigated it and found out that loads of sewage was being dumped into his river, which is a story across the whole of the UK. We have some of the dirtiest public waterways in Europe. But yeah, so I just wanted to highlight the story. Again, it's just, so the story basically is about water sewage, which on the face of it, if I told any of you I'm writing a story about water sewage, I don't really think any of you would want to read it at all. But when you kind of just change the context by 1 or 2 degrees, they did such a great job with the design. There are lots of other pictures of him fishing. You can like approach really serious subjects in an incredibly, they did such a good job with the layout in a really beautiful way and get important messages across without people even really realizing it. And then a lot of the time, when we think about how we engage critically with contemporary culture, often in publishing, and I've mostly worked in this way myself, it's very like the publication decides everything and kind of produces the work, and it's up to the readers whether they like it or not. Whereas recently I've been working on a project which kind of totally flips that. There's an agency called Protein in East London, and they do a lot of trend forecasting with big brands like Nike and Chanel. And they wanted to launch an editorial platform for their community. So for the past few months, they've been getting about 250 writers, artists, illustrators, strategists, thinkers, a really nice spectrum of people from around the world. And they have an online forum where people drop ideas into the forum every day. Some kick off and there can be like 50 comments, others, people aren't interested in, they die. And then every week we kind of pick 2 or 3 topics which have been quite popular, where there's been lots of engagement. And we kind of write an article about them, or we invite one of the community members to elaborate on their thoughts. So it's kind of a very community-driven project. And sometimes that makes it really hard for the internal team. So they're one of my clients. I do a couple of days a week for them because you have much less control over the kind of content you're producing and putting out there. So I might be editing about something I have literally no idea. So I have to like do more research than I might normally have to. And then now we've started to print it out. So when someone drops an idea, they call it seed. And then now we're starting to print out a seed library. So it's super kind of lo-fi DIY. We want to encourage people to print it on their own home. And the idea is over a year or two, you're going to have this like vast resource with like hundreds of articles, essays. Someone could write a poem. It can really be anything. It's not kind of traditional media at all. Yeah, the idea being over time, you just have this big resource at your disposal. Yeah, I think that's it. So yes, it's just broadly thinking with your own work, like what stories you want to tell and what platforms suit you and suit those stories and images and image making best. And it doesn't always need to be a massive company. It could be a small company where you might have more freedom, or it could be a community-driven thing. So yeah, that's something I've been thinking about a lot recently. It's just how do I want my work to be disseminated and the process by which you do that. Thank you.
We're going to invite our guests to come grab a stool and James as well, and we'll have some time for discussion. There we go. Okay, theoretically now, people who are on Teams should see us. No, I don't see us. Everyone else. I can start. I have a bunch of really dumb questions, but also some questions that I think are dumb enough that we should really talk about them. Oh, and we haven't, Mike. The first one is like, what do we mean when we say independent publishing?
So yeah, this is interesting actually, because Courier was an independent publication and then it got acquired. So the whole meaning of what that meant was quite drastic for the company. But when I say independent publishing, I kind of think of an organization which doesn't have outside investment, or that isn't part of a huge traditional legacy media company. I think it's very rare for many magazines, publications to still be independent after a long time. Longevity is a massive issue. I'm not sure whether The Face is still independent, but if it is, that's probably what they're doing.
Wasted talent.
Oh, did it? Okay, there you go. Ones perhaps which aren't beholden to advertisers as much as traditional media companies are. We might go into it, but there are loads of different. I don't think any of them are fantastic, but there are so many different business models now in terms of publishing. Advertising probably isn't the best one, but yes, I think if you can be true to what you want to be and don't have too many outside pressures, that's a good place to start with thinking about what an independent publication means.
Yeah, I think for us, the idea of independent has meant that we don't have a particular stakeholder to return to sort of deliver any kind of report to it. We're not driven by their intentions. So even though we have people we work with who I guess do fund us for a particular issue, we don't have anyone we kind of consistently go back to who needs us to give them any kind of report. So I think for us that's felt like independence, but it does mean that it's very difficult to, and we also don't, advertised traditionally, sort of with any kind of print advertising. So we've tried to think about advertising as using words or information, articles as a space to kind of advertise ideas, I guess, or to represent people's projects, research. So that's also felt like independence, because even though we do still have people who are funding us, they're not getting to sell a product to us. But you sell lots of independent magazines, and you have.
Actually, it's quite funny even from a design perspective. I mean, at Loose Coffee, we say we sell independent magazines, which we do, but we also have Monocle and Courier. We did, and a lot of specialist stores around the world that just sell independent magazines will maybe go by design to an extent. So it's quite interesting, isn't it? And from our side as well, when we're retailing, when we're distributing magazines, so we distribute to WH Smith, Barnes and Noble, and independent stores around the world. And a lot of the time when we make the decision on what publication we take on, we do make it on that design, from that perspective, and even how we distribute it goes on that. So it's I think there's a big part to play in that.
Yeah, even though there's no set definition, as it were, I associate independent publications with like smaller teams, a particular kind of, you can see the design ethos quite quickly when you're looking at an independent publication as opposed to like much big publication. I think there's more experimentation. Also working with them, things can be good at that, but things can happen a lot more quickly. Like you can, because the teams are smaller, you can make decisions a lot more quickly. You can get things out there a lot more quickly. Yeah, so there's some of the things I associate with independent publishing. How about you, Matthew?
Well, I don't know if well, so I guess my thought was, is it the actual economic model, or is it the attitude? Because both of your presentations, there's a real sense of the agency that you use actively, right? In the way that you decide what to run, decide what to write about, decide who to work for. And I guess probably, John, you've had varying levels of agency within your writing that maybe is a bit different from Nina's experience as a co-founder of the magazine. But agency, I guess, is a major question, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I still do some writing, for example, for The Economist. I flip into a very particular mindset when I'm doing that work. It's almost like it's like another self. It's not me. So yeah, I think you can really tell when something's independent. You get that feeling across, even if you don't agree with it or love the design. I always admire that go-getting attitude and the spirit of like just going and making this thing because you really want to.
Do you notice in the way that your words are edited the difference between independent and non-independent? Because I think that's even that, just the sense of criticality, I guess, like you said, the ability to approach particular topics or to write more radically, is because you don't have anyone there's no stakeholders necessarily in the same way. You don't have to worry about those people, but maybe you do. Maybe the words are kind of edited more.
Most publications will have a style guide, and some of them, could be 4 pages long. Some of them could be 100 pages long, which are essentially rules. And I guess it's the same with design. Obviously, there's a particular design which. So yeah, with some words, some people will call something a conflict or a wall, or it's kind of like a minefield sometimes. But I guess you look at the publication you're writing for and you try and like gauge what's a good thing to do.
I mean, there was something that came through, John, also in your presentation, which is that it almost seemed like you're kind of implying, I think, that you can anticipate the type of the writing based on the design. It's almost like the design and the writing somehow are, they define one another, right? And I wondered if you could speak a little bit more about that, and also for Nina as well. So the question as I wrote it was, how does the design of a publication nudge the editing and the writing? Doesn't it? Or is it in reverse? Or does it depend on who starts the magazine?
I think for us, because we were founded by illustrator, designer, engineer, kind of flood barrier engineer, we it was so in tandem that it was like, I think they nudged each other, but we definitely nudged them. I think, like I was saying, asking different questions. Like when we get all the first drafts through, not only the editors read them, but I always read them as well and say like that's really boring, or like that doesn't make any sense to anyone who isn't in that particular bubble. And so I think we have that. And I guess that kind of comes across in our aim in the design is to make things more accessible and clear. And so that mindset of trying to make things accessible and clear also goes into the way that we look at the text maybe. So I think they work in tandem, and we're really lucky that we are able to have that kind of back and forth quite consistently. But I don't know if it's, I mean, we only publish twice a year, and so there's actually quite a long like gestation period in the making of the project where we get the text quite early and the design follows and the illustrations follow. And so I guess we were able to kind of like digest what the flavor is. And the flavor is also dictated by the people who want to write. So we always have an open call, and that open call almost kind of defines what the theme is, because we'll suddenly be like, I think it was just when Trump was leaving office the first time, we got a real sense that people were like feeling really positive. So we did the regeneration issue. So we felt like there was definitely a flavour in the contributors' way of writing that was brighter, and so we, I guess, matched that in the design. That felt like a really nice healthy. But I think you're able to do that when you've got a longer period of time to make something.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. Mentioning Cake Scene again, the one I referenced when I was talking earlier, they're kind of a publication I actually think everything about it is just so unexpected. It looks, I hope none of them are watching, I love it and I buy every issue, but it looks quite boring. It looks how you would expect a baking magazine to look, but then the content is kind of like quietly radical and just extremely original. So that's an example of when I'm surprised, because normally you just kind of have a sense. The design completely dictates the tone of the publication, right? So it's quite odd if the writing doesn't match that, or vice versa. So generally, I think you can. I mean, I couldn't really explain, but like the new Whitney review that was up, I think you can just tell what its sensibility is going to be like from looking at it almost.
I have a question on that. When you were showing the covers there, Lena, with It's Freezing in LA, and some other magazines on kind of sustainability are very conceptual with the covers, and it's quite tough to tell. And we discuss this all the time with what we do with the retail side of things. It's conceptual covers versus quite clearly what it says on the tin, and looking at commercial magazines. And Courier as well. The last Courier, I mean, that was the best-selling magazine that we'd seen. It just flew off the shelves. And what do you think made that happen? What do you think it was the in terms of the cover? What made that such a difference in that space?
So the biggest, so Courier issue 50 was a big relaunch, the one with Urchin Changwon, and I think the photography was much better. But aside from that, the biggest difference was we basically took off nearly all of the cover lines, and I think it just gave a lot. It just was so much more confident. Before we used to, and loads of publications do this really successfully. We used to have like 15 different cover lines, and maybe it looked a bit desperate, I don't know. Whereas the image with like very few words, we'll put them all at the bottom. It just kind of had a lot more of a confidence about it, and then the image was quite strong.
But also, I guess when you were talking about that piece, when you were saying that matching of the tone and the image or the design, the piece also was kind of like intimate discussion with this person. So it felt like that as a tone of voice to sort of see that person there to have a conversation with, it matched what was happening inside the pages.
Well, I was going to say the online crowd has already beat you guys to the punch. They've submitted 2 questions. I suspect it's where some of you want to take this conversation anyway, so I'm going to read them out. The first one is from Yeshim, who's one of our year 2 students. She says, how do you secure funding for self-publishing? Or how do you sustain financial viability while maintaining creative independence? Let me count the ways. I don't know. You guys can talk about your experiences. And then Jules, who's one of our graduates and teaching assistants, says, how do you deal and move around funding as independent publishers? Are there best practices that you can share?
No best practices. um, for us, that kind of like map of all the people we've worked with, it has always just been working with other organizations, other groups who we agree with in some way. We're happy to platform and allowing them space to talk about their work. So I guess, yeah, it's a way of advertising, but that is how we've always sustained it. And also just the print sales. So we have at different points had different levels of support. So Octopus Energy was a support of ours for a few different issues, and they obviously is a much bigger company, much more able to support us printing many more copies. But when we started with that market supporting us, we also hand bound 250 copies of the magazine ourselves, which saved us some money, not enough money, I don't think. And we then were just really lucky to, with those sales, we picked up a Stack Magazines, who's an independent magazine kind of subscription service, supported us for our second issue, helped fund the printing of that. So we were really ad hoc. We didn't pay ourselves for many years. And then when we did, I think when you start paying your contributors, which obviously you should do from the outset, but is maybe impossible when you are a really baby magazine, you obviously can then you never go back from that. So it's kind of like you set yourself bars as you go. And we started small. We always were like, contributors are the first people that need to be paid. And then we do this, and then we do this. We've never had a physical space. We were very lucky that not WeWork, but basically WeWork just gave us a bit of a space at one point, which was lovely because it was really, really helpful to have a studio, have a space to work together. But it has always been like incredibly ad hoc and kind of chasing our tails a little bit. But also working with people who know what they're doing. Working like we work with Roman Holly, the distributor. We have a fulfillment company who help send the magazines out to buyers from our website. Like the people that can help you. Sometimes it's kind of worth giving and taking some of that. Like where do you get the support from the professionals who know how to do it, rather than having magazines kind of stacked up in your hallway, which we had for many issues. So I mean, that doesn't answer the question. It's different for everyone, and for many people it's advertising, but for us, it was advertising via a slightly different avenue. If you've seen inside the magazine, it might make more sense that we don't really have print ads, but yeah, that's kind of, it's not very good. That's where we're at.
I mean, yeah, that there are thousands of different variables. Like again, just to use an example I already showed you earlier, like Real Review. When Jack launched that however many years ago, it's a specific size, so it fits through a letterbox. It uses some of the thinnest paper you can possibly use, so it doesn't exceed, I don't know what the rules are, but like a particular weight, so you can still use a first class envelope. So you thought all of these things through, like how heavy the font is, because ink weighs something. Even with like he was the difference between like a tenth of a gram saves him thousands of pounds when he distributes it. So like there's a crazy level you can go to in terms of like cost cutting like that. Then what Nina was saying, yeah, like you could print 10 magazines if you wanted to, just make them absolutely amazing. Don't even sell them. Do an event where people can like a lot of traditional media companies are so screwed. The narrative is, oh, media's completely messed up, because a lot of them employ 1,000 people and they can't let 800 people go. So there are so many different business models. Like that's why I think it's like chicken and egg. Like it's an incredible time for publishing. We could launch something in 2 weeks if we wanted to, but at the same time, like funding models, you have to be a lot more creative. Like I think a good mix is starting something really small print and then also doing like a podcast on Patreon or something where you can make a pretty good living off that. So it's like how you combine, if we're talking about print now, how you combine print with other bits of the business model that can kind of like take in that cost for you.
Also sell things in person, like the like off print magazine fair, which happens at the Tate. We sell more there than we do in for 11 months a year. Like it's physical sales, people seeing your magazine, being able to flip through it before they buy it, is just does help people kind of connect with it. So yeah, it's physical sales events when you have a launch, like selling things. also just having, I mean, there's thank yous at the back of a, you know, magazine get longer and longer, but like donors, like some people do just want to support projects. There's like angel donors want to just, they see something in the project and want to help. And even if it's like 25 quid a year, it's like, that's how many people you've got doing that. It's a big help. And I think starting not solo as well. I think starting with other people, you just split that load and the network gets bigger. You have other people who might be able to reach out to someone that can support, or, you know, they always pass a particular coffee shop every day that will stock it, or, you know, just starting not by yourself, because it can be super daunting, I think, if you're solo.
And I also think people, it's like any career, when you start out day one, you're not going to become a millionaire, right? Like, it's okay to start slow. It's okay to work for 6 months and print one thing and then figure out how you do issue two. Like, it's okay to do things slowly when it comes to making magazines and, you know, media projects. Like, you don't need to pump them out like one month. Like, you just really have to think about what you're, you know, do you want like a huge readership, or do you want a really small niche readership who absolutely love what you do? Do you want to make your publication £2, or do you want to make it £30 and have, you know, people really committed to buying it? So there's so many different ways to do it. Just have to like really make sense for your project, like whatever that might be. You were saying recently, like, some of your best magazines are the most expensive ones.
Yeah. Like,
people are just obsessed and they're going to buy it no matter what.
Yeah, true. Yeah, the cover prices this last few years have just shot through the roof, and it doesn't. There used to be a point where you discuss £1 difference and how much it's going to affect the sales, and now, you know, going from £10 to £20, you don't really see any difference in the selling. You know, they still sell through the same rate. Like you say, it's definitely the best time that we've known, well, at least in the last, well, since I've been sort of running what we do now, for launching the magazine. There's endless places that want to sell magazines, want to be involved. The community is stronger than ever. So yes, and I mean, in terms of being able to, like, say, print a small number, test the water, and kind of do it yourself for a while, and then see what you can tap into and build it from there.
Should we take questions here from the group? Oh, here, I thought you were. Oh, yeah.
If I talk about your creative process, because I really like to talk about this ex-musician, and then you interviewed him, the sewage story came. So where does this room for discovery? Sorry, for you.
I just personally, I love like reading magazines online. So I'm always like coming across like tons and tons of different stuff. That guy's actually huge on Twitter now, again, just from talking about sewage. So I literally go on Twitter like once a year, but I saw like one of his tweets. He had this like crazy map of sewage hotspots across the UK. It's just, and like, he's so passionate about it. He comes across as slightly insane. Like, it's his whole life I was campaigning for clean water. So you kind of want to meet someone that's had such a crazy career change. So we just went, I thought it'd be nice just to go fishing with him. I've never fished in my life. So we went fishing for like 6 hours at his club, and just, well, creatively, I'm quite like quiet when I'm, you know, I kind of like try and create a nice environment for people to speak, to, you know, to want to talk, not to like pressure them. Like, I've never been a news journalist. Like, I'm not that kind of, I don't have that kind of sensibility. And I think that's the same way I work. Like, I have an idea, or I'll just look at as many different references as I can. I see if I think I can say anything new, or if there's been a lot done before, do I think I can do a slightly better job? Because it's hard coming up with completely original ideas all the time. Like, it's impossible, right? But sometimes you just think, oh, these 3 publications have done it, but you can tell they've only had like half an hour with this person, and they haven't given it the attention it deserves. So I guess they're creative. I just read a lot, tons of different kinds of sources. Yeah, like loads from social media, loads from magazines, newspapers, novels. Yeah, I get ideas from like a lot of different places.
Yeah, That's a really hard question, I think. Maybe with this project, because I'm working with so many people, it's quite hard to like define maybe what my creative process is within the load of people, especially because I'm kind of trying to I'm often quiet and visible at the back, kind of trying to like steer it rather than actually being in there kind of making lots of it. But I think it comes from conversations with each other. It comes from being able to, we're all in different industries, like I said, so listening to what people are just doing and are interested in. And we're really lucky that lots of the people that we work with who are kind of from the scientific background are within kind of green energy, green engineering. And so we're able to kind of hear a little bit what's happening there maybe, and they're able to kind of inform what we might want to do next. And then in terms of the actual making of the magazine, it often starts creatively with the data set. So with when we've got the theme and we've got a lot of the writing, we'll think about like what the data set might look like, and that sometimes comes from the one of them, which was like a kind of toxic. It was toxic plumes, so there was lots of different like kind of green plumes within this purple images. Some of them we took some from overhead of someone smoking downstairs, and then some of them were images we found online. We just do quite a lot of working together, sending things back and forth, figuring out what could work, trying things in different ways. I think we're quite lucky maybe to, when we're working on the magazine, being the designer, we're quite lucky just to be able to have quite a lot of back and forth, and no one way I don't think, but lots of conversation.
It annoys me sometimes because I've got a really good friend of mine, a photographer, and I swear he never reads stuff, he never watches stuff. Like if you're like, oh, did you see like White Lotus? He's like, no, what's that? Like, and he's very successful. And his image making, he comes at it from just such a different process to me. Like I went a long way around to your question. I basically do a load of research. I'm very like research orientated, and once I feel like secure in my head, then the creativity starts to kind of come a bit more. But I feel like I need a really firm research-based grounding. Whereas loads of people are just like, oh shit, that's amazing. Like the idea just comes. Like, how about you? What's your creative process?
I tend to spend a lot of time on research, and then the deadline's coming up. I hope I get a.
That never changes.
Slowness. You spoke about like releasing 2 magazines per year, and I guess the broader question is how do you find slowness and being okay with slowness and publishing slowly or doing slow journalism in a climate which is not slow and is not asking you to be slow. Both that's very vague.
No, it's not vague. It's a constant clash, I think, and it's a clash with lots of the people you work with as well, because especially if you're having people fund the project, they might want something to happen within a particular time frame, or they can only fund something within a particular time frame. But the only reason we publish at those 2 points is because we have subscribers who also fund the magazine. That's another way that we can print. So we have to print at those times. I don't think it is comfortable, and I think I'm not slow as a person, even though I like to preach about it. It's really hard to to make it happen slow when you don't have very much time. I think the thing that maybe we've started doing more of is just pulling things away to make even if you do have less time, make the process simpler. So in the most recent issue, which is purple and brown one, we didn't have as much time or as much money. So we only published in 2 colours, and we also we worked with 1 illustrator, which didn't make it cheaper, but it did make the conversations that were going back and forth, there was fewer people for me to kind of have to like check, because normally it was 11 illustrators, 11 writers. So I think finding ways to kind of simplify, and I don't know if anyone likes that as much, but it was much more comfortable to make within the actual time we had. So I think if it can't go more slowly, then it's finding a way to make it feel easier maybe, but and not being hard on yourself if it's not the best thing you've ever done. Like within the time you've got to enjoy it, and you can also refresh the way that you do it. Like we published another thing that was much smaller, literally physically fewer pages, smaller book. Just because it's smaller, it doesn't mean it's less valuable. So yeah.
I think limitations can be incredible from a design perspective and a writing perspective. Like it forces you to be more creative, more urgent in how you produce your work. So sometimes it can be great. And obviously you don't want to be like stressed about money every second of the day. That's like not nice. But yeah, slightly in response to this slightly, but like for me, a lot of the rushing around comes with like all the stuff you have to do around the work you create, like social, promoting it, distribution. Like there's so much to honor a good piece of work now. That's like a whole nother job, you know. Like when there's so much stuff out there, if you put something out there, it just gets lost straight away. So it's kind of like always trying to remember, not whoever you're working with, to like encourage everyone to keep the energy up even when you've quote unquote like finished it. And that's the bit where that's kind of what annoys me most, I guess. It's like that's when I want to slow down and like sit back and be a bit proud or whatever, reflective, or just do nothing. Whereas that's actually the moment when you've got like, I'll have a second wind and go again and make sure the people you want to see the work.
I think it's also worth noting that not everyone in the project will think that we'll be working as quickly. Like maybe if that's something that is in your head, you are someone who can work quickly, because I've noticed that even when things are super pressured, some people just don't work very quickly, which is probably really, really good for them. But it's worth kind of listening to the flows of the people around you and being like, am I like, what pace is good here? Because I'm going super fast and it feels a bit chaotic and difficult. But actually, like, do I have to do that, or am I working in a way that's just like, I don't know, super, convoluting like some different systems? Because yeah, I've always found like the way that Matthew works, the designer, is he, even in the most kind of stressful moment, is like super calm, slow. And I've tried to kind of learn from that as well. So I think that's difficult in a team to kind of figure out what the speed is. And I guess, like you said, someone nudging you at points to be this or that can be helpful, but it's also worth just like listening to the people around.
I also think it's good to lean into whatever like you're good at. Like if you're crap at social, don't even do social. Like don't bother. Like Monocle, they literally don't have an Instagram. Yeah, they don't do any social media, which seems kind of wild, but it works for them. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, so many with any creative project, like I think a big challenge is stripping back what you do. Like, if you want to do print, cool, do it really well. If you want to do social, which like TikTok, Instagram, what do you want to do both? If so, why? Like, so it's like stripping back what you do as well. It's really important.
And figuring out if it's actually worth it. Like when we took a break in 2020, I think, when we'd all just kind of had a bit much, and so we took a year break, and we were like, we're not going to do anything. We're not doing anything on Instagram, not doing anything online, and nothing happened when we came back. It was still like, it's still, you slowly pick it back up, and it wasn't the end of the world. Nothing's going to kind of like fall to pieces if you don't kind of do it all the time.
Well, so something now in this conversation is taking me back to the first question, which is, what do we mean by independent publishing? We're getting to that social aspect of it, right? That there still does seem to be something about print publishing that, in contrast to the term independent, actually creates community, right? So I think the kind of independent publishing ethos that we're talking about is actually publishing that does draw people around ideas and create a sense of commonality. So in a weird way, it's sort of the definition of independent is that it defies the independence of its own nature in a way. Which was not a question, sorry. It invite contradiction.
Yeah, it kind of did. I guess we both talked about projects that did involve lots of people, and that is, I think, one way of thinking about it. And for us, has made independent magazines doable. But there are magazines like Fat Boy Zine, which I heard him speak a couple of months ago, and he started it completely solo, I think. and did run it solo for quite a few years before bringing on a designer, just out of a love of kind of like cooking, and made it work in, by literally independently by himself. So I think that there are models of doing something like that, but you do have to be a particular kind of person who I guess can put on all of those hats and feel comfortable about like doing all that promo yourself, maybe, and getting it out.
Yeah, I suppose that's probably one of the best ways of actually describing an independent magazine, not having to deal with a frequency or sticking to these deadlines. If you've got to worry about advertising, if you're in a retail chain like WH Smith's, you have to hit certain volumes to stay in the store, which will just be thrown out there that your listings will go. So that creates some freedom to not have to stick to deadlines. Is a big part of that, I suppose.
Yeah, I have a question about scalability. Do you think there's a limit to how big independent publication can be? Would you want to take on even more external funding so that you can get your messages across to more people? Does that mean that you're sacrificing editorial authorship and just your own kind of personal message?
I think there is probably a limit to how much you publish to make it sustainable. I wouldn't want to put a number on it, but we published 12,000 of one issue, and that started feeling like it was like, ooh. And when you were talking about independent magazines, like some of the biggest non-independent magazines don't print hugely bigger numbers than that. And so it did feel like that felt like, this is starting to feel like there might be quite a lot of these lying around. And I think Octopus Energy basically wanted a lot of them so they could give a lot of them out for free to their customers, which was fine, but it does make it feel a bit less like a sort of thing that a value exchange that you're like wanting to kind of deciding to engage with. So I think there is a limit, and I think it's probably just however many people want to read it and will actually read it and engage with it. So that's why we've used pre-orders. We try and use pre-orders a lot to understand what people actually want, and then you print kind of around that if you can. I think we definitely would. We've applied for funding before. We've definitely done. We've looked for funding. The funding that we got from Octopus was actually kind of like an arts award that they gave us to for 2 years. So that was, I guess, like a funding application. I think we would, but we would never want to only work on a project. I think everyone in the magazine wants to do the other things because they enrich the project. So it would be great to be able to like consistently say you're working 1 day a week throughout the whole year, whereas now it's like you're working 1 day a week for 3 months and then you're not, and then you are. Whereas the nature of a project is it will go throughout the entire year, obviously. So I think if we could have a bit more consistency to support the team and maybe support a space, then that would be wonderful. But I don't think we'd ever want it to be at full time. We'd never want to become such a big publication that it was kind of weekly, monthly. I think it's that slowness that, like we were talking about earlier, still feels important. It feels important to kind of like push back against the kind of like super fast click a web page and then never revisit it kind of thing. But yeah, that's probably my thoughts.
Yeah, I think maybe as print technology develops more, it could make the opportunity to scale more sustainable as well. So you can print to that kind of quality in the US, which at the moment you can't really unless you pay a fortune for a smaller volume of copies. Then that could be that's the way we see it scaling. So we're doing a lot in China at the moment to try and develop the network there, increasing the interest with independent magazines. But then you've got to get the stuff there. So there's always that big logistic barrier and the sustainability side of it. So I think that could be one of the ways in the future that things will develop to be able to make that more possible.
I think there's also, I mean, like the project you showed at the end, that's the kind of buildable magazine that you kind of add to over time. Like there's models of publications that could exist that are a single sheet that you fold, that obviously you could still stuff with content, but you reduce the amount of paper, you reduce the amount of the volume, and so you can maybe print more and feel comfortable about it. But it's always about value, isn't it? It's like what are you valuing here? Is it the resource? Is it the information? Is it the exchange that someone might have after that point? And I think that's never going to be a black and white. It kind of has to be, I think, per issue. Even for us, our numbers go like this because we kind of, it always depends on so many other factors.
I think for the sake of time, we should probably stop there. Before we go on to prizes, I'd like to once again thank Pauline and James for helping to organize, and also, of course, to Nina and John for presenting.